One constant in life is change, and the investment world is certainly no exception to that. As the world is changing, more and more investors are looking to invest in a socially responsible way, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How can you invest in a socially responsible way, and really, what is the cost to that? Is there a trade-off of sorts that you have to make as an investor from a return standpoint if you're investing in a socially responsible way? My name is Mike MacKelvie. I'm a certified financial planner with Mariner Wealth Advisors. I'm joined today by Valerie Escobar, who's also a certified financial planner with Mariner Wealth Advisors. This is Your Life Simplified. Valerie, popular topic today, but first, how you doing?
I'm good. It's interesting that we have the topic of socially responsible because it is, it's a discussion that it's focused on the heart, right? And what it is that people feel and what's important to them. And so on that topic, I want to revisit another topic that we had that was really heart centered, and that was about pets. I have a guest.
Lucy back?
Lucy's back. And for our listening audience, you'll notice that, or you should know that Lucy is wearing a cone of shame.
Oh, Lucy.
And so Lucy, we have chickens, and Lucy has the job of watching out for our chickens. Something's been trying to get them. And if you can you see her eye, Mike?
Yeah. Oh, geez.
Yeah. So she got a big old scratch. And the reason she's wearing her cone of shame is because she had to get stitches. And so sadly, that means that I had to use my pet insurance and made a claim.
This was not a plug. We're not
this was definitely
here.
Not a plug. And there is I am proud that Lucy did her job of watching the chickens. The rest of the members of the family are just appalled that I would have let her be outside and put her in danger. Yeah. But I did submit a claim, and I will get back to you. I said it was a very easy process, and I think I'm going to get. That's good. This was $450, just so you know, to get her stitched up. They did a rabies booster. But that was only $60. So yeah, most of it was just vet, unexpected vet stuff, which is what.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I'm glad to. So Lucy's going to make a full recovery, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And a lot of people have asked if she's going to lose her eyes. She's fine. Her eyes just great. She's running into people using her cone as a, get out of the way type of tool.
I'm glad she could join. I honestly didn't even know she was down there, so I'm glad that.
I know she's my secret dog.
The three of us.
You're going back down. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think this is just a really popular topic, especially the last decade. It seems to have sprung up, and I think that's far beyond just what I'm feeling. You look at the market share of just even ESG, right, which seems to be the most prominent screening there is, really criteria of sorts. It's making up a huge chunk of the investment sphere now. People are more and more conscious of where they're directing their dollars, and if given the option to invest in a more sustainable way versus a non-sustainable way, I think most people probably are going to do that as long as there's not too big of a trade-off of sorts, right? And that's, again, part of what we'll talk about today. But I think maybe what we'll start here, Valerie, is just outlining what ESG is. And then we'll touch on just a couple different other ways, investors can invest in a socially responsible way, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Socially responsible is, there's an alphabet soup about it, about the different forms. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, right? And the field has just changed so much over the last, decade, really, because it used to be, I want to be in socially responsible. There was this one mutual fund company out there. And so if you bought their stuff, you can feel good and everything's dandy, right? Now the field has become much more complex as people have really been like, well, who are you and why, what is your opinion on what it is? So let's start with ESG, environmental, social, governance. This section is really focused on positive screens. And so these are companies that actively look for, or these are screens that actively look for companies that invest in a certain way. And so environmental, the first word, that one's probably easiest because you can actually quantify it, right? You can say,
Definitely.
we invest in companies that, have a certain number of pollutants or whatever it is, or reduce the
Hmm.
pollutant or whatever it is. And so that is more of like, I'm actively looking for companies that do these specific things.
Hmm.
With the social and the governance piece, that's where we get a little bit trickier, right?
It's
Because it's like,
challenging.
you treat your company, your employees well. Well, what does that mean? Says
Right.
who, and like, what's the metric to measure
Who's
all of that? So,
defining that? Yeah. Who's defining that? I mean,
mhm,
uh, there certainly is a challenge, an undeniable challenge there in, being able to measure something as intrinsic or subjective as social and governance, right? But I don't think that's any reason why this measure would be futile of sorts, right? So just because it's challenging to measure that, and just because we have a variance in what people believe is good from a social stance or a governance stance, I don't think that's a reason to say, okay, well, hey, this is just completely a waste of time. We shouldn't be considering from an investment stance how companies are behaving in those two categories. And there's actually, very much reason to believe in companies that are acting in a socially responsible way, certainly from like a stance of how they're treating their employees, right? So this isn't just some political manifesto of sorts that companies are looking for, though it's sometimes I think it can feel that way. This very much is in their best interests, right? Just how are you treating your employees? We just haven't ever really measured that or had a criteria to measure that. And that's what, this socially responsible movement is looking to do. It's looking to create a criteria that can be used by companies so the public can have a transparent way of saying, okay, how are these companies really actually treating their employees? How is their, from a governance standpoint, how is their board managing things? What's their executive compensation? What are they getting paid? Um, I think those are, important details. And again, just because we've seen this issue with the ESG rating systems, which is worth noting, the fact that there's several of them and they tend to defer, especially on the S and G. I don't think that's any reason to say, okay, well, it's not really working here in the first decade or first couple decades. We're trying to measure this, so we just shouldn't really pay attention to that. Um, I just think it takes time to get a legitimate grading scale, and there's always going to be debates about what's the best way to judge the S and the G. Maybe it's just a diversity of thought. I don't know how you feel about
right.
that, but that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the ways that people have gone to tackle that problem is by seeking a different approach, which is, we can say SRI, so
Right.
sustainable, responsible impact. This one is a little bit different because it more focuses on negative screens. And so this one says, okay, I'm okay with investing on whomever, except if they do specific things. And so if we
Hmm.
say like they derive more than 10% of their revenue from I don't know, blood diamonds, or from child labor, or
Hmm.
whale blubber, or whatever it is. But they are very specifically saying like, this is my hot topic item. I don't want
Right.
that to be in there.
Right.
This really evolved from religious principles, where religiously we don't believe in X, Y, or Z, so we must exclude that
Tobacco
from
or
our
alcohol, for
investments.
example. Yeah.
Yep. So again, a little bit more quantifiable, but again, not perfect. And
Right.
so it is a very much, it behooves us as investors to really decide like, what is the most important thing for us,
Yeah.
because it can become pretty quickly overwhelming, especially when we're looking at things that are not necessarily quantifiable, like you said.
Yeah. And again, I think this, kind of the thread that maybe exists here is we're gaining this transparency. And perhaps what that allows investors to do is just, there's a diversity of, let's just say, ratings or ways to invest from a socially responsible light. And because of that, it kind of gives the diversity of people, because we have obviously various religions, various beliefs here in our country, gives you a chance to maybe say, I want to be a little bit more particular about where I'm investing. Now, I think, again, as I mentioned in the onset of this, the question is, what's the trade-off beyond just, okay, there might not be a perfect rating system for this. What's the trade-off from a performance standpoint? And I think there is somewhat of a misconception, perhaps because ESG marketing sectors have done such a phenomenal job talking about, hey, look at this performance versus the broad-based market, to where people kind of believe they can, get their cake and eat it too, right? Hey, I can invest in a socially good way and outperform the market in for long periods of time. Broadly speaking, at least for ESG, that has just not been the case. Now, within ESG, because there's all these different types of ESG funds, you might find some outperformance, especially over short periods of time, right? Like one article I saw was touting in the beginning of the pandemic, it was like 1 month performance, talking about how it was doing better than the market. It's like, okay, well, that's 1 month. But in the long run, it's likely there'll be some trade-off for investing in maybe a more socially responsible way. It's not to say that it's guaranteed by any stance that that'll be the case. It's just that it's not always that when you invest in a socially responsible way, you'll also be compensated for an excess return. Like that's not going to exist there each. I mean, that sounds pretty understandable to say, but when you look at a lot of marketing companies, at least a lot of investing companies' marketing presentations, you wouldn't maybe believe that sometimes. You'd believe I can just invest in a socially good way and do better.
Right.
But it just
Right. And I mean, there
hasn't always
are
been the case.
some arguments to be made for it, right? Like if
Yes,
you are a green company and you're thinking, I want to reduce my expenses on electricity, right?
yeah,
That does help the bottom line, right? And that could
certainly,
generate revenues in the future. Or maybe you
certainly,
say, that companies will be happier if they are, really focused on gender equality and that, it just
right,
creates a more harmonious workplace. So yeah, I
right,
mean, there is some there. I guess you could be optimistic about it, but you also could, the data is just not
yeah,
concrete. There is nothing that says for sure every ESG will outperform or
totally,
underperform.
yeah,
It's
and I
just a little
think,
bit open still.
yeah, and I think on that, it's like, like the areas that I would say a large majority of people seem to agree on, like, okay, if a company treats their employees well, like, do you think they'll do better than a company that doesn't? I think most people would say, yeah, right. It's just that it's not a one-to-one trade-off in every category of ESG, which again, if you look at some of these presentations and you say, wow, look at how great it's done, you might not understand, you might not believe that if you just look through that lens, right? So again, it's important to evaluate it and understand, typically, broadly speaking, what we've seen for the entire ESG marketplace is there is some trade-off in performance. Certainly varies though.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, did you want to touch on SCI real quick?
Yeah. So SCI, this stands for socially conscious investing. This is really another term come up with this industry that is meant to represent funds that do a little bit of both. That they're saying, we're doing our positive screens that we like to include companies that focus on gender equality, but also we'll have a negative screen that we also exclude all companies that derive more than 10% from fossil fuels
Mhm.
activities. So meant to be a little bit of both, happy medium, but like it's just going to be like, where am I picking my battles? Do I
Mhm.
trust that, I don't know, Morningstar is the one that is doing the best job of navigating that field and that their ethics and considerations are in line with mine?
It's a
I don't know.
legitimate question, very legitimate
It's
question.
just a lot of research.
That's one of the challenges with any of these socially, investing in a socially responsible way is like you have to have some criteria, some grading scale, right? Whether it's SCI, SRI, or ESG. And what are you going to do? Just personally as the investor, you gonna run that grading system, that criteria. I mean, I don't know anybody that has that kind of time on their hands. So you probably have to look to some methodology that exists, and there's going to be varying methodologies. But one of the things on that, and I'm curious on your take here. I don't know if just having like a regulated standard for grading, a company's ESG or a company's SRI is actually better. I don't know if that's better than having this variance in opinions, because okay, if there's just a regulated standard, that means the government is effectively choosing what now is ESG, or the SEC
Right.
maybe is coming to some conclusion there. And you can probably, there's a little bit of a reaction to that, because it's like, well, how do they know? And what
Right.
about when things change, as they always do, as we talked about in the beginning of this episode, right? So um, I don't think just having one standard is the best. My hope with this, and I, again, curious on your take here, is that it will evolve into something where, again, as transparency comes out here, and we see that some of these are like, well, that ESG methodology is kind of benefiting a lot of oil companies that aren't doing that great of stuff, right? Um, my hope is that we start to find a maybe a little bit more accepted index that we say, okay, it's not perfect, but this is probably the best methodology that exists there. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't think just one regulated standard is the best.
Right. No, it's such a minefield. I know Morningstar has like sustainability scores effectively. And so Morningstar, you know, it's a behemoth of data. And so you can say, well, they know a lot of stuff. And so being able to use that data and tally it up and know what's going on, that'll give them good reason to be able to make the scores where they are. Um, but it's just going to be like everybody's opinion. Right. And
Hmm.
so I don't know that it's ever going to be something that's super right. It shouldn't really be regulated. Like you said, the government or who is responsible for the ethics of
They're gonna tell
everybody.
us what's socially good, like, I mean, we
Right.
know, like, hey, you probably shouldn't do like some extreme things, right? But um
Right. Yeah.
who's
The
gonna
no
draw that line?
murdering, index,
Right.
like that one's probably pretty easy and everyone can get on board with that one.
Yeah.
But
We don't
yeah, like
advise.
what
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the things, that we do internally here at Mariner is we do have personalized equity portfolios. And I wanted to
Yeah.
kind of touch on that because I think that this one, so what we do is what we do is tell clients that we can personalize their investment portfolios. And these are all equities. So it's just individual stocks based on what their personal criteria is.
Mhm.
One thing I do tell clients is to have that mental conversation, that emotional, heartfelt conversation with yourself before I send you the checklist. Because the
Mhm.
checklist of the types of screens is immense. Like you'll look at it and you'll be like, my big thing was that I want to, I don't like pharmaceuticals, right? And so I can
Mhm.
exclude all pharmaceutical companies. But then you're looking through and you're like, oh, but, there's people that manufacture weapons of mass destruction. I don't like that either. And oh, actually, the airline industry is really obnoxious. I'm going to get rid of that too. And all of a sudden, you're marking off everything on the form. And then what are you investing in? There's nothing
Right.
left. And so it just becomes really overwhelming. And I think this is sort of this ethical question that you have going down the street. Should I give this homeless person $1 or not? What's he going to do with it? And is there a better
Right.
way to spend my dollar and to help him? It's
Yeah.
a minefield for sure. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's not worth trying.
No,
Like you
no,
said.
again. Yeah, again, anytime we have innovation, this is, sometimes brought up with like electric cars, for example. It's like, well, the process to create the battery is more harmful for the environment than just using traditional gas powered car. Like, who's to say though that, through innovation, we can't get to a point where it's not that way? Like, this is the very early stages of, electrical vehicles, at least being used by the masses. And so who's to say that, we can't get to that stage where, the batteries that are required, the production that's required isn't is harmful. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm not a scientist in that stance, but it's like that's an example of innovation. Again, hopefully getting to a point where it is better, for the environment. So again, I'm very much with you there. I don't think it's futile, but for each investor, great point, it's important to go through these ethical checklists and really just see, okay, what is it that you care about? And some people might say, I don't care about it at all. I just want to get the
That's
best return.
Yeah, and that's
And
totally fine too.
that's totally their choice. That's their decision. Some people might say from a religious stance, I don't want to invest in these companies. Some people might say from an environmental stance, I don't want to invest in these companies. So it's going to be subjective. That's probably why the rating systems are subjective too. Hopefully you found that helpful. And hopefully you understand that although there is vagueness to this, we certainly we're certainly with you in trying to help you decipher what the best way is to do this, but it really does depend greatly on your situation and what's important to you. Um, Investing in a socially responsible way is something that a lot of people care about, and increasingly more and more people do care about. And overall, I think that's a good thing. Like, people are getting the chance to invest more in line with their values, and not just invest for the sake of, well, I have to because I need to have some return on my monies because at some point I got to retire, right? So overall, I think that's a very good thing. But again, understand, as Valerie has pointed out here, it's somewhat of a minefield. It's a very new age philosophy and criteria and rating system that exists. So just understand that there's not going to be a clear way to do this. And it's likely that this is the case, that there will be some trade-off that you'll have to give from a performance stance. So make sure you're evaluating that as closely as you can. Again, my name is Michael MacKelvie, a CFP with Mariner Wealth Advisors. I was joined today by Valerie Escobar. Make sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, so you don't miss out on any more industry professional content from us here at Mariner Wealth Advisors. This is Your Life Simplified. You guys take care.
Talk to you later.
Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money. The views expressed in this podcast is for educational purposes only and do not take into account any individual personal, financial, legal, or tax considerations. As such, the information contained herein is not intended to be personal, legal, investment, or tax advice. Nothing herein should be relied upon as such, and there is no guarantee that any claims made will come to pass. The opinions are based on information and sources of information deemed to be reliable, but Mariner Wealth Advisors does not warrant the accuracy of the information. Asset allocation diversification is a strategy designed to manage risk, but it cannot ensure a profit or protect against a loss in a declining market. Certified Financial Planner, trademark, CFP, registered trademark, and federally registered CFP with flame design marks, collectively the CFP registered marks, are professional certification marks granted in the United States by Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, Inc., also CFP Board. The CFP registered trademark certification is a voluntary certification. No federal or state law or regulation requires financial planners to hold the CFP